friends. And Dr. Michelle is the nice one, Devaki, and it's our joy to be with you this morning. Our reading today from Ways of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriya-yoga. Truth invites, it never commands. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Free will is a basic principle of life. God never coerces. He invites us to live in such a way that we find fulfillment in ourselves. If we refuse to live rightly, Paramhansa Yogananda taught, God simply says, I will wait. We have eternity to live. In that eternity, we live as we choose, in self-created darkness, a darkness as intense and as long-lasting as we choose, or in the infinite light, the true self, which is God. Jesus Christ in the Beatitudes offered a beautiful example of God's way of inviting mankind to seek perfection, not by commanding, but by offering his human children the incentive they need to choose the right of their own volition. Blessed are the poor in spirit, Jesus said, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. In each of the Beatitudes, Jesus explains the blessing attendant upon observing it. The divine way, similarly, for each of us, is not to do violence to our own natures. Spirituality must be obtained naturally. It can never be attained by force. The Bhagavad Gita says in the 3rd chapter, even the wise behave in accordance with nature as it is manifested in them. Of what avail, then, is suppression? The scripture goes on, however, to explain that this doesn't mean we should surrender to the dictates of our lower natures. Rather, it emphasizes our need to aspire to the heights. But each of us in accordance with his own nature, and not in imitation of anyone else's, offering ourselves up for purification by divine grace. Desire, whatever form it takes, so the Bhagavad Gita explains, should be resisted, even if only mentally. Attachment and repulsion to sense objects, both of these are universally rooted. No one should accept their influence, for verily they are man's enemies. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Michelle, your cord is wrapped around your microphone.
Hopefully that's better.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Someone in the back's looking out for me. Truth invites, it never commands. Isn't it wonderful that God is this way with us, that he lets us make our own decisions and he gives us this free will to figure this out without feeling forced into anything. That's his love for us, not to impose himself on us. Our reading today is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, the beginning of what's known as Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And the first part of that sermon, which is the Beatitudes. And I will have to confess, having not had a strong religious upbringing, until recently I couldn't have defined fully what beatitude was. So I looked it up. It is a state of supreme blessedness. It is, in essence, living in the experience of God's joy, of bliss. And so what Jesus is sharing in these teachings are some basic attitudes that help us to live in that experience of omnipresent, all-pervading bliss. And I don't know about you, but when I first look at some of these verses on the surface, there are some parts that don't feel very blissful. And maybe a few that don't feel particularly deep on the surface. And usually that's a clue to me that my understanding is at fault. And then I turn to what did Yogananda and Swami Kriya-yoga say about this. And so that's what I want to share with you this morning, is their take on this. And I want to start by setting the stage. And that is the context in which Jesus is sharing these teachings. The first verse of Matthew tells us that Jesus was in the midst of the multitudes, and he went up to the mountain, and his disciples came up with him, and then he started speaking, sharing his teachings. And Yogananda says in his commentaries that this sentence and some of the parts that follow in the Sermon on the Mount are sort of a clue that these were not teachings that Jesus was sharing with the masses. These were teachings for his close disciples, those who were thirsty to know God, those who really wanted to grow spiritually. And so what he's sharing here is the inner meaning. And Jesus is not saying in these verses, thou shalt, or you should behave thusly. No, instead he's saying, when you live in this way, you experience the blessedness of God's joy in your life. He's inviting his disciples to try these things out and to see for themselves, and us by proxy. So this first verse, blessed, and there's 9 of these Beatitudes in total. Blessed, the first one, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Poor in spirit here does not mean poor-spirited. It does not mean downcast, downtrodden. Poor in spirit, Yogananda said, refers to a lack of ego attachment to the things of this world. Money, riches, power, fame, any of that. A sense of our own sort of unimportance in this whole grand scheme of things. And that it's not necessarily about being materially poor, but it's an inner renunciation to attachment to the things of this world. And that when we have that inner renunciation, then we experience God's joy. The second beatitude, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And mourning here is not about mourning the death of a loved one or the loss of some material thing or earthly hope. Because as we know, mourning these things doesn't really bring us happiness. Yogananda said that this is about a divine melancholy. This is about that ache in our heart when we start to awaken and realize our separateness from God, and that ardent desire to be reunited with the divine. And Jesus is saying here that when we long for God in that way, we'll feel God's comfort. Yogananda has talked about how we should be the naughty baby of Divine Mother and call to her unceasingly. And that when we do, we experience her presence. She comes to us as herself, as divine love, as wisdom, what have you, whatever we need in that moment. The third one, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Meekness here is not about submissiveness. Meekness, Yogananda explained, is about the attitudes of humbleness, gentleness, and kindness. And that when we manifest these attitudes, when we behave in this way, we attract to us subtle influences from the universe that help us on the physical plane, on the mental plane, and on the spiritual plane. When we behave in these ways, we act in harmony with nature and the laws of nature, and we grow in wisdom, and thus we inherit the earth. Number 4, blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. The great masters of all traditions have told us that nothing in this world will fully satisfy us. Yogananda said that the sense of emptiness that we each have that we're trying to fill is our soul's desire for God. As St. Augustine said, Lord, Thou hast made us for Thyself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until we find our rest in Thee. And so our thirst is quenched, our hunger is satiated when we have that experience of the divine in our lives. And Yogananda said that righteousness here refers to right action. Right action in the physical plane, on the mental level, and on the spiritual level. And that when we are striving to behave right, to do right action, to be righteous, then we receive the bliss of God and we find that satisfaction that we're longing for. Number 5, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Yogananda said that mercy is a sort of fatherly heartache for his erring children, and that this is part of the divine nature. This heartache, wanting to help the child who, out of ignorance, has made some mistake. And he said that really only the wise can be merciful, because it's the wise who can step back and see that this person who's erred is just a soul, and that this is out of soul ignorance, spiritual ignorance, and that this soul is just as deserving of love and forgiveness and help and guidance as any other. And so what Jesus is saying here, if you want to receive divine mercy in your life, then be merciful to yourself, be merciful to others, and consciously serve as a channel of divine grace in this world. Number 6, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Yogananda said that the consummate or greatest religious experience we can have is the direct perception of the divine. And how do we have that experience? We have that experience by purifying the heart. All the scriptures tell us this. And how do we purify the heart? We purify the heart by moving beyond heavy likes and dislikes and attachments. This is, in essence, the path of yoga, as Patanjali said in his second aphorism, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirot. Yoga is the neutralization of the waves or vortices of feeling. And so, through regular meditation practice, we calm the feelings in the heart. Through attunement to wisdom, we educate the heart. And it's through that practice that we purify the heart and then have the blessed experience of direct perception of the divine. Number 7, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. One of the first experiences that many people have of meditation is experiencing a sense of inner peace. Yogananda said that when we commune with God as peace, when we experience that inner peace powerfully in ourselves, then we feel motivated to help share that peace, to help grow that peace in our families, in our communities, in our country. And so, blessed are those who are tuning in and consciously serving as channels to help expand that peace in the world. And these individuals come to see that we're all just children of God. There is no difference based on nation or creed or any other of the petty little differences that often we tend to get in the way. Number 8, blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I mentioned that righteousness is about right action, so this is about the blessedness that comes through performing right action, even when we're persecuted or criticized or it goes against wrong social customs or peer pressure, or even just working against our own sort of bad habits and temptations and challenges that we experience, that when we adhere to right action, to Dharma, that there's the blessedness of God's joy that comes to us either at that time or later on that we experience. And finally, number 9, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad. For great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. Jesus was a master, an avatar. He undoubtedly knew what his disciples were going to face after his crucifixion and the persecution and torture that some of them would experience. And what he's telling them here is, don't be dismayed, don't be intimidated by all of this. Follow these teachings, follow what you know to be true. Follow righteousness, right action. And in doing so, you will experience that same great reward, that same good karma for your spiritual tenacity that the prophets experienced. And they all had to deal with this too. So he's telling them, you're not alone. This is the price of trying to live righteously in the world, that there are going to be these influences that do not like righteousness and actually actively try to counteract that. And he's encouraging them here to stand strong in adhering to the truth and not following the ways of the world. Yogananda, in his commentaries on this, also quotes a passage from chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita, And it's a nice parallel to these teachings, so I just want to read that briefly. He who is tranquil before friend and foe alike, and in encountering adoration and insult, and during the experiences of warmth and chill, and of pleasure and suffering, who has relinquished attachment, regarded blame and praise in the same light, who is quiet and easily contented, not attached to domesticity and of calm disposition and emotional balance. That person who's dear to me. So my friends, these are some wonderful teachings here that Jesus and Yogananda have given us in how we can experience God's bliss in our lives. And they're not saying, you have to behave like this. They're saying, try this out. You might see what this is like and what this leads to. And as we do so, we begin to experience even just a little bit of that joy bubbling up within. And the more we follow that leads to more inspiration for us as we continue that, and the more we experience that. So may we all experience that bliss in our lives ever more fully. God bless you.